It sounded like a jet engine was taking off. The next thing you know,
there was like white smoke coming out,
which quickly turned to black smoke. It was spewing black smoke, and it was creating all kinds of chaos.
Yeah, there was almost. So the diesel heater is under this bench at the moment because we really wanted to seclude it because the heater kind of made us nervous and it was a last minute ad. So we didn't actually come up with this layout with the heater in mind, right?
Correct.
Okay, so the heater is in here. And as you can see, that is like a total waste of space when you're in a van and you need space. Like this could be storage and it is currently not, obviously, because the only thing I ever have in here is this heater. So the diesel heater is under this bench and then we have it, the tube, whatever you call it, blowing out, what?
Vent.
The vent blowing out right here, which has worked perfectly for me.
So Danielle showed you where we ultimately decided to put the diesel heater inside one of her benches, which, as she mentioned, completely impacted her ability to use that for any storage. She has the 136 ProMaster, which is the smallest, or one of the smallest vans. So we were somewhat limited in where we could put it, and it was kind of late in the process. We've seen a lot of people place it underneath the seat, the passenger seat, so then the airflow blows into the living area. We looked at that real briefly, and I don't know if the larger vans are configured differently underneath, but it would have required an awful lot of manipulation to get it positioned under the seat. We would have had to take the whole seat off. Underneath the van was a much more challenging to vent it for the exhaust pipe. So we quickly decided that wasn't going to be an alternative. The other option that probably would have worked and maybe worked well was to put it actually in the garage and then again have it blow into the living area. I think if we were to do it again, we wouldn't put it in a storage location. So a couple of things that we had to decide on logistically and from a safety standpoint is where to specifically locate the diesel heater within our confined space. One of our limitations was making sure that it was sufficiently located within the van to avoid any of the frame underneath, particularly because we had to drill multiple holes through the floor and then through the floor of the van, and I wanted to be sure that we avoided any of the structural components of the chassis underneath. One of the other concerns we had that we had to deal with is making sure there was sufficient space here to allow for the diesel heater to generate the air circulation that was necessary. And you can hear it operating at the moment. It is quite cold in Florida today, believe it or not. Okay, as far as the installation goes, there's a metal bracket at the base of the Chinese heater that has two holes within the bracket, one for exhaust and one for external air circulation. And basically you have to drill two holes through not only the subfloor but the floor of the van, the actual van itself, to then externally mount those two features. So one of the big challenges was being able to have enough space to actually connect the exhaust pipe as well as the incoming air vent to the bottom of the Chinese diesel heater. After multiple attempts, what I realized is I had to attach both pipes to the bottom of the Chinese diesel heater itself, take those pipes and put them through the floor of the van, and then mount the Chinese diesel heater to the base of the van, the floor of the van itself. That required drilling a much larger hole in the floor, the subfloor of the van, not the actual van itself, but the subfloor of the van, to allow for some movement in order to then provide space for me to mount the metal heat shield plate at the base of the Chinese diesel heater to the floor. Okay, a couple things from a safety perspective that we would highly recommend. As I mentioned, we had to drill through both the floor of the van, the subfloor, and the van itself from the heat that's generated by the diesel heater. First off, we use this 3M fire barrier that has a very high heat resistance rating. I put that all on both the floor of the van itself, on the wood around the area that I cut out to allow for the exhaust pipe in the air vent. And then there's a metal plate on the base of the Chinese diesel heater that mounts to the floor. I put it up underneath that as well. So anything that could conduct heat, basically we insulated with this. The second thing we did is we went to the auto parts store, and they make, it's basically 1 inch, 1.5 inch heat resistant tape that they use on engine manifolds. Wrapped the exhaust pipe with that tape. I'll show you up underneath exactly what it looks like, but it worked extremely well. It went all the way up to the base of the Chinese diesel heater, and then all the way down through the van and out the exterior to again provide some resistance to the heat that's generated. The other thing you want to make sure you do is you angle your exhaust pipe so that it is out from underneath the bottom of the van, the floor of the van. You don't want those fumes just sitting up underneath the van and then eventually working their way in the van, particularly when the van's just sitting idle. So this configuration, we just made an L, and it seems to work very well. Okay, now we're up underneath the van, and this might make a little bit more sense, but you can see that we actually drilled 3 holes through the floor of the van. And as I mentioned up top, one of the issues was making sure that we avoided the frame itself when we had to drill the holes. So I had to measure in from the outside of the van, outside edge, back into this area here, and then take those measurements back up top, the storage area where we mounted the actual Chinese heater, to be sure that we were sufficiently inside the van so that when we drilled these 3 holes, again, we avoided this this part of the chassis. The 3 holes, this is the air, fresh air intake. The second is the diesel fuel line, and then third is the actual exhaust itself. And this material here is the material that I mentioned we bought at the auto parts store, that basically is a heat resistant tape that is used in the automotive industry on actual exhaust manifolds and whatnot. So I wrapped the pipe, as you can see, both externally and then up inside the van itself to help with the heat resistance. We mounted the diesel pump and the filter inside, drilled a hole down underneath to bring the line up over here, and then up into the diesel heater itself here. Mounted it up against the chassis with these particular brackets, which worked well. And then the line goes to the back. We installed the diesel tank back in the back of the van to make it a little bit easier to add diesel fuel, rather than take the tank out, because it is connected to the line, and the line goes all the way up above the wheel hub and then down to the fuel filter and the fuel pump, and then from the fuel pump got a hole drilled into and through the floor of the van, and then as I showed up underneath, that line goes all the way underneath the van and back up into the diesel heater itself. It sounded like a jet engine was taking off. The next thing you know,
there's like white smoke coming out,
which quickly turned to black smoke.
So we're pretty sure this is where the van was sitting when we had first installed the heater, and that entire circle is where it burnt the driveway from the first time turning it on. I think it's important to note that we had a lot of chaos surrounding the install of the Chinese diesel heater. It took us probably 4 days to figure out. So it was probably like 2 days before we thought we were gonna be done with the entire build. And I was like, I'm ready to go. We're gonna get out of here. Like, it's gonna be awesome. And then we're like, wait, let's install the Chinese diesel heater. It was a last minute ad. And then like 4 days later, after hours and hours of frustration, Googling, joining forums, watching more YouTube videos, we thought like literally the van was gonna explode as we were installing this.
Well, I think to clarify, once we had it installed, and we've talked a little bit about where we decided to put it, and because it was a late ad, we didn't have that many options. So once we had it installed, we had to figure out how to get it to operate. And the instructions on the Chinese diesel heater from the Chinese manufacturer were somewhat limited. So Danielle did a lot of research on Google and YouTube trying to figure out how to operate this thing. Once we figured out, or she figured out how to get it operating, we live in Florida. We built the van in Florida. By the time we were at this point, it was May. It was probably in the high 80s. It may even have been approaching 90 degrees. So in trying to get this thing to generate heat, she had to turn it up to a very high level, charred the driveway, and we freaked out. We tried to get it to shut off. If any of you have a Chinese diesel heater, you're aware of this. It takes a long time to both heat up, but even longer to shut off. And so the whole time that it was shutting down, it was spewing black smoke, and it was creating all kinds of chaos.
Yeah.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. 10, 9, 8.
That's on? Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
Pause it.
You gonna set this?
Yep. I think it's important to note. I did that again. Exhaust and the
Turn it off.